is it against protocol to let a proceeding go on when you've got a suspicious person, 90 minutes worth of people talking about this person, and we don't stop the proceeding? Does that defy protocol?
So Senator, while there's 90 minutes in total from when he's first identified by local law enforcement, we have about a 30-minute window. But at no time is there anything ever communicated about weapon or harm.
Recently discovered video from a local business shows the shooter pulling himself up onto the AGR building rooftop at approximately 6:06 p.m.
The new acting director of the Secret Service and the FBI deputy director are now in the hot seat on Capitol Hill, answering some very important questions and providing updates on the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, what we are learning about the suspected shooter, and who really is to blame for what happened. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So we previewed this a bit yesterday, but now we are going to do a full recap, the testimony of two key figures in the investigation into the shooting of former President Donald Trump out in Butler, Pennsylvania, back on July 13th, a shooting that left Donald Trump wounded, 2 injured, 1 dead. This is not including, of course, the shooter who was neutralized by a counter-sniper team. But what are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that acting director of the Secret Service, Ronald Rowe Jr., and FBI Deputy Director Paul Abate appeared for a joint hearing with the Senate Judiciary and Homeland Security Committees about this shooting. Now, it is important to note, this is the first time someone from the Secret Service has testified since Mr. Rowe's predecessor, the former director of the Secret Service, testified last week, Kimberly Cheadle. And her testimony didn't sit so well with lawmakers that day because she seemingly didn't answer a lot of their questions. And you know what happened? She resigned the very next day and Rowe was put in her place. This was amid a lot of calls for her to step down. So it's a very, very big deal for him to testify. Is he going to testify like Cheadle? Also, the deputy director testifying, where are we in this investigation? And that's what we're going to get into right now, because we still have so many unanswered questions as to A, why and how did the shooter commit this crime? And B, how was he allowed to do it? What were the breakdowns in security to allow him to set up an AR-15 style rifle on top of the AGR building on the outer perimeter of the pro-Trump rally and fire 8 shots? Why was Trump allowed on stage? How was the shooter, identified as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, not stopped? Especially since we reported yesterday on Sidebar that local law enforcement was apparently aware of Crooks 90 minutes before the shooting. He came on their radar as a suspicious individual. He was carrying a rangefinder and backpack. Now, I think the most appropriate place to start will be with Rowe's opening statement, because as you will see with his opening statement and his testimony in general, it was in stark contrast to his predecessor, Kimberly Cheadle, because if you recall, she had testified that she was limited in what she could say because of an ongoing investigation, that she was going to wait for an official report, that she didn't have all the information. And remember, there are multiple investigations happening right now by the FBI, by the Homeland Security Inspector General, an independent panel appointed by U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. There are congressional investigations. Quick note, by the way, about the congressional investigations and these hearings, because we're about to talk about one today. Congress, their job and their responsibility and their authority is not to file criminal charges against anybody. They can't do that. They can recommend charges. They can't really fire anyone. Their mission is about creating legislation, reforms, regulations. They are trying to understand what happened so they can make changes in the law. And that can very well be directing how the Secret Service is funded, for example. Do they need more resources? Do they need more help? So with that in mind, it was a very, very insightful day. As I mentioned, I'm going to start with a sampling of Mr. Rowe's opening statement. Again, keep in mind how different this is from Kimberly Cheadle's testimony from last week.
I will not wait for the results of those findings to assess where we failed that day. I have taken and will continue to take immediate steps to ensure we do not repeat those failures. Since my appointment as the acting director 1 week ago, I identified gaps in our security on July 13th and have implemented corrective actions. One of my first actions as acting director was traveling to the Butler Farm Show site to better understand how our protection failed. I went to the roof of the AGR building where the assailant fired shots, and I laid in a prone position to evaluate his line of sight. What I saw made me ashamed. As a career law enforcement officer and a 25-year veteran with the Secret Service, I cannot defend why that roof was not better secured. To prevent similar lapses from occurring in the future, I directed our personnel to ensure every event site security plan is thoroughly vetted by multiple experienced supervisors before it is implemented. It is clear to me that other protective enhancements could have strengthened our security at the Butler event. As such, I have directed the expanded use of unmanned aerial systems at protective sites to help detect threats on roofs and other elevated threats. I've also directed resources to facilitate our protective site communications, particularly our communications with our state and local partners. In addition, I have instructed the asset request for Secret Service protective details to be approved expeditiously and have ordered the maximum use of requested personnel at protective sites to address this heightened security environment. I've heard your calls for accountability, and I take them very seriously. And given the magnitude of this failure, the Secret Service's Office of Professional Responsibility is reviewing the actions and decision-making of Secret Service personnel in the lead-up to and on the day of the attack. If this investigation reveals that Secret Service employees violated agency protocols, those employees will be held accountable to our disciplinary process.
So he's not waiting for a report. He's acting now. It's very different from Cheadle. By the way, as we talk about this, we use the services of our sponsor, Truthfinder, to look up Thomas Matthew Crooks. It's pretty incredible what you can find in there because as one of the largest public record search services in the United States, Truthfinder can help you find some answers about almost anyone, including the people in your life. So have you ever thought about, by the way, looking yourself up? I think you should check it out. You can go on their website, truthfinder.com. You type in a name. Within minutes and a paid subscription purchase, you can access unlimited reports that could include information like phone numbers, location history, criminal and traffic records, including possible arrests and criminal convictions. Also, if you type in an address, it shows you registered sex offenders in an area, which honestly is just kind of wild to see. And right now, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. Go to truthfinder.com/LC Sidebar. And then he talked about something else. He talked about how his agency is cooperating fully with congressional investigations here, and even says he regrets that more information hasn't been shared with the public because that has led to false conspiracy theories about the shooting, that it was a false flag event, or it was an inside job to kill Donald Trump, or that the sniper who killed the shooter had to wait for the green light to open fire, that he didn't have the discretion to do it himself. That was something that Roe really honed in on and said that's not right. And that tone, again, seems to be in stark contrast with some of the testimony of Kimberly Cheadle, who, again, was arguably not entirely transparent with Congress. But then, listen to this part.
Neither the Secret Service counter-sniper teams nor members of the former president's security detail had any knowledge that there was a man on the roof of the AGR building with a firearm. It is my understanding those personnel were not aware the assailant had a firearm until they heard gunshots.
That's important because there was a lot of chatter about what the Secret Service knew and when did they know it. I mean, after all, it has come out that a local law enforcement officer was hoisted up to the AGR building. Crooks then apparently pointed his weapon at the guy, and he drops to the ground, and then within seconds, Crooks opens fire. In fact, that became a key piece in this story.
24 to 30 seconds between the time, I believe, local law enforcement officer was hoisted on the shoulders of another police officer, saw a person armed less than 200 yards away from the president, who I believe jumped down. What happened in those 24 or 30 seconds? I mean, obviously, there's no such thing as a panic button. You know, the first thing you'd think is you hit panic, you cover the president, get him off stage. None of that happened. What happened? Is it just that I hear a text message? What actually happened in the 30 seconds where a law enforcement officer knew that a gun was pointed in the direction of the president from a fairly short range? What actually did those folks who did have knowledge of exactly what was happening and could probably infer what was about to happen, what did they do?
See, that's a big part the communication between local law enforcement and Secret Service. During Rowe's testimony, he seemed frustrated that communication about crooks was siloed and it was stuck in the law enforcement channels, that it wasn't properly relayed to the Secret Service. And he seemed to put some of the focus, maybe even you want to say blame, on the failure of law enforcement. And there's been crosstalk about this, about who was to blame, who's responsible. Who was responsible for securing the AGR building? Why was it on the outside security perimeter? Who didn't communicate what? In other words, how much of this is local law enforcement's fault and how much of this is Secret Service? Isn't it their overall responsibility?
I think what we made an assumption that there was going to be uniformed presence out there, that there would be sufficient eyes to cover that there was going to be counter sniper teams in the AGR building, and I can assure you that we're not going to make that mistake again.
At that point, if there were an open channel of communication in which they were able to tell him, he's got a gun, take him out. You could still take President Trump off the stage. You could have him duck. You could have the shooter neutralized. Do you not have a channel of communication by which they can say, gun, take him out?
So again, Senator, that information stayed in local channels and did not make it over to Secret Service.
Did they not consider that relevant?
You're saying
that the local police didn't consider that relevant enough to pass along to the Secret Service?
Sir, I think that they were in the midst of dealing with a very critical situation, and they articulated that over the radio, as I understand it. However, it was never relayed over to us.
Now, on that point, Pat Young, who is the chief of detectives from Beaver County, Pennsylvania, he pushed back on this. He pushed back on these claims on News Nation last night, and he said that local snipers, they didn't receive the proper information from Secret Service, and it was the job of the Secret Service to answer why no one was guarding the roof line, not local law enforcement. And this gets complicated because, as you will see, whether it's a matter of resources or the environment, the Secret Service does work with local law enforcement to try to cover all areas and get additional support, but clearly there was a breakdown in communication of some kind, or there's the blame game. And actually, there was some tough moments during Rowe's testimony. You see, he was not only grilled about the failures of the Secret Service, but also where's the accountability? And I tell you what, he got very tense.
Why is there not a Secret Service counter sniper on that roof?
So, Senator, when we post up, our methodology is to look at things that can see in on our protectees so that they can provide that coverage.
But why is there not a Secret Service counter sniper there with clear line of sight? That roof has a clear line of sight to the former president. Why didn't you put a Secret Service counter sniper there?
The Secret Service's counter sniper role is to neutralize those threats that are looking in on us from where the protectee is, not necessarily
you think maybe position. You might want to revise that protocol in light of what happened here?
They were protecting the principal, and I think the
principal got shot.
I understand that, sir.
So do you think you might want to revise the protocol? Let me ask you this. Who was the lead site agent who made the decision to leave the AGR building completely outside of the security perimeter? Who was that?
Senator, I cannot give you that name. This person is operational. They're still doing investigations. They're still doing protective visits.
Have they been relieved of duty?
Senator, they have not been relieved of duty. I know their name, by the way.
Why have they not been relieved of duty?
They are still cooperating, not only being interviewed by the FBI, but also by our Office of Professional Responsibility. And we will let the facts of the mission assurance and any further investigations play out.
The person who made the decision to send Donald Trump onto stage knowing that you had a security situation, has that person been relieved of duty?
No, sir, they haven't.
Has the person who decided not to pull the former president off of stage when you knew that, in your words, the locals were working a serious security situation, has that person been relieved of duty?
No, sir. Again, I refer you back to my original answer that we are investigating this through a mission assurance. And as opposed to zeroing in on one,
what more do you need to investigate to know
exactly what the decision-making process was? What more do you need to investigate
to know that there were critical enough failures that some individuals ought to be held accountable? I mean, what more do you need to know?
What I need to know is exactly what happened, and I need my investigators to do their job. And I cannot.
A lot of people didn't do their
I cannot
jobs.
put my thumb on the scale. Otherwise,
What do you mean put your thumb on the scale?
You're asking me, Senator, to completely make a rush to judgment about somebody failing. I acknowledge this was a failure of the
Is it
Secret
not
Service.
prima facie that somebody has failed? A former president was shot.
Sir, this could have been our Texas school book depository. I have lost sleep over that for the last 17 days,
Then
just like you
fire
have.
somebody to
And I will
hold
tell
them
you,
accountable.
Senator, I will tell you, Senator, that I will not rush to judgment, that people will be held accountable, and I will do so with integrity and not rush to judgment and put people
I can't believe
unfairly
that you
persecuted.
are unfairly persecuted.
Unfairly,
We've got people
sir.
who are
we
dead.
have to be able to have a proper investigation into this.
Like I said, it got a little tense there. Roe really pushing back on Senator Josh Hawley's claims or his questions. And Hawley also brought up this idea from a whistleblower who apparently came forward and claimed that local law enforcement had abandoned their post that day because it was too hot outside. To which Roe said he wasn't sure if that was true and he's looking into that. Hawley pressed him on why he doesn't have an answer to that. But I also want you to see this back and forth with Senator Ted Cruz, because one major point has been whether the Secret Service had denied Donald Trump's campaign request for additional security assets. And that's complicated by the fact that there was mixed messaging from the Secret Service on this.
Just after the shooting, Secret Service put out an official statement from your spokesperson that says there's an untrue assertion that a member of the former president's team requested additional security resources and that those were rebuffed. This is absolutely false. In fact, we added protective resources and technology and capabilities as part of the increased campaign travel tempo. Was this tweet accurate?
With respect to Butler, Pennsylvania, it is accurate, sir. If you're talking about Butler, Pennsylvania, all assets requested were approved. If you're talking about the media reporting of assets requested, there were times when assets were unavailable and not able to be filled, and those gaps were staffed with state and local law enforcement tactical assets.
How many requests did the Trump team or the Trump detail ask for?
I can get you that number in a queue.
You don't know now.
So I can speak to the ones that reported in the Washington Post, and we can go through them if you like.
You've had 2 weeks. You had a spokesperson put something out that is false on its face. By the way, did you approve this statement when it went out?
I don't know if I did or didn't, Senator.
Has this spokesperson, is he still employed? Does he still have a job?
He is still employed, Senator.
So he lied on behalf of the Secret Service. He still has a job. Is it true that on the day of the Butler event that Secret Service transferred agent from President Trump to the First Lady?
No, sir, that's not true.
That's been widely reported.
It's not true. There was one airport agent that actually went on the manpower request for the Trump detail. They handled the arrival at the airport for the First Lady.
What was the relative size of the Trump detail compared to the detail that is assigned to the President or the First Lady?
Senator, the former president travels with a full shift, just like the president.
So the exact same size? Is that your testimony, that President Trump had the same size detail that President Biden has?
On the day of in Butler, the agents surrounding him, it is the same number of agents surrounding the president today. There is a difference between a sitting president who also not only
Hold on, you're using president in a way that is not clear. Is it your testimony that in Butler, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump had the same number of agents protecting him that Joe Biden has at a comparable event?
I'm telling you the shift, the close protection shift surrounding.
That's a yes
what
or
you
no.
asked me, Senator, and I'm trying to answer it.
You are not answering it. Is it the same number of agents or not?
Senator, there is a difference between the sitting president of the United States.
Then what's the difference?
The difference?
2X, 3X, 5X,
National
10X?
Command Authority to launch a nuclear strike, sir.
I'm not
there are other
asking.
assets
How many
that
more
travel
agents?
with the president that
Sir,
the former president will
you are
not get.
refusing to
but
answer
the number
straight.
of Secret Service
Sir,
agents protecting him.
Stop interrupting me.
Go ahead,
You
Senator.
are refusing to answer clear and direct questions. I am asking the relative difference in the number of agents between those assigned to Donald Trump and those assigned to Joe Biden. I'm not asking why you assign more to Joe Biden. I'm asking, is the difference, is it 2X? Is it 3X? Is it 5X? Is it 10X?
Senator, I will get you that number so you can see it with your own eyes.
Now, we've been talking so much about Mr. Rowe. Let's also talk about the other person who testified, because we also learned some information from FBI Deputy Director Paula Bate. Now, the FBI investigation is not about the failures that day, but it's more about the shooter himself, the planning, the motivations, how he did it. For example, listen to what he said about the shooter's social media activity.
Something just very recently uncovered that I want to share is a social media account which is believed to be associated with the shooter in about the 2019-2020 timeframe. There were over 700 comments posted from this account. Some of these comments, if ultimately attributable to the shooter, appear to reflect anti-Semitic and anti-immigration themes, to espouse political violence, and are described as extreme in nature. While the investigative team is still working to verify this account to determine if it did in fact belong to the shooter, we believe it important to share and note it today, particularly given the general absence of other information to date from social media and other sources of information that reflect on the shooter's potential motive and mindset.
Here's the issue with this. There appears to be a second account possibly attributed to Thomas Matthew Crooks on the social platform Gab that shares different points of view. And in fact, Gab CEO Andrew Torba posted on X after this testimony, quote, "The FBI is now claiming that the Trump shooter Thomas Matthew Crooks had an unspecified social media account in 2019-2020 when he was 14 to 15 years old that posted anti-immigrant and anti-Semitic content. This is not consistent with Gab's understanding of the shooter's motives based on an emergency disclosure request we received from the FBI last week for the Gab account Epic Microwave, which based on the content of that EDR, the FBI appeared to think belonged to Thomas Crooks. The story is this. The account for which data was requested was unequivocally pro-Biden and in particular pro-Biden's immigration policy. To the best of Gab's knowledge, as of 2021, Crooks was a pro-lockdown, pro-immigration, left-wing Joe Biden supporter. Very, very, very strange. And it's also strange, generally speaking, that we just don't have a clear-cut motive yet. And the FBI has been thorough. They say they're not only looking through his digital devices, his online history, but as Abate explained, they conducted more than 460 interviews. They issued search warrants. They served legal process to dozens of companies. They collected hard drives. They received 2,000 tips. They are using, according to him, the full resources of the FBI, and yet still we do not have a clear understanding of why Crooks purportedly did this. Abate also testified about how Crooks got onto the roof with the weapon, which was interesting to hear.
How did Mr. Crooks, how was he able to get an AR-15 onto the roof of that building? Does your investigation illuminate anything that we have learned to help to make that point more clear?
We don't have definitive evidence yet as to how he got the rifle up there. Based on everything that's been collected thus far, photos, video, eyewitness accounts, we do believe he likely had it in the backpack.
Broken down in the backpack?
We're still assessing that. Our laboratory has looked at the rifle itself and measured that against the backpack itself. And if placed in this backpack, it would extend outside. It would have been visible. We don't have anyone who observed him with the backpack with a rifle, a barrel, or other part of it sticking out of the backpack.
And we know that FBI Director Christopher Wray testified last week that Crooks may have used a collapsible stock on the weapon too, which may have made it not easily noticeable, and maybe it was a way for him to carry it. But Abate also testified that, quote, "There is no doubt that Donald Trump was hit by a bullet and not shrapnel from, glass of the teleprompter or something like that," because that is consistent with a statement from the FBI released on Friday that said, quote, "What struck former President Trump in the ear was a bullet, whether whole or fragmented into smaller pieces, fired from the deceased subject's rifle." But that is significant because last week on Wednesday, Christopher Wray had testified at the time that he couldn't definitively say whether it was a bullet or possibly shrapnel. But hey, listen, in his defense, one way of looking at this is investigations are fluid. Facts change. He said that himself. He's able now to confirm some details that we didn't know a few days ago. Sometimes in investigations, that's not surprising. So, we have some more information, but will this temper theories of what happened? Will this add fuel to the fire? We shall see. But what is clear, though, each day, each week, we are getting more information. However, with mixed messaging and changing facts, it is a bit hard to keep track about what exactly is going on and what exactly happened. But we will do our best here on Sidebar to sort it all out for you. That's all we have for you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.